My family thought I was a failure, a reckless culinary school dropout who couldn't afford their world. But when they chose my five-star restaurant for their lavish engagement dinner, I knew it was time to serve them a dish of undeniable truth. Before they tasted my secret, I still remember the weight of that envelope in my hands. Gold embossed, sealed with wax, like some royal decree had just landed on my doorstep. I almost laughed. Of course, Elton's engagement dinner would be announced like a coronation. But as I held it, a part of me already knew what lay inside and what it would tell me. On cream cardstock, the elegant script read, "You are cordially invited to celebrate the engagement of Lilton Maddox and Cecily Prescott." The location, printed in smaller font, screamed at me. The Bellwether, my restaurant. For a long moment, I just stared, the irony of it all digging its claws in. 5 years of silence, 5 years of vague holiday cards and clipped birthday texts, and now, out of all the fine dining venues in Charleston, my family had chosen mine, completely unaware I'd built it from the ground up. The easiest choice would have been to toss it, just like they'd tossed my dreams. But something in me paused. I thought of the girl I was 5 years ago, at 21, the day I walked out of their world, tired of pretending, carrying nothing but a small suitcase and a voice no one wanted to hear. They'd called me reckless, ungrateful. My mother, Blythe, clutched her pearls as if I'd suggested robbing a bank instead of attending culinary school. My father said nothing, just poured another drink. Elton didn't even look up from his phone. Now they were dining under my roof, sipping from stemware I'd selected, about to taste food born from hands they'd said weren't made for work. I ran my fingers over the invitation one last time, then set it down beside my knife roll. This wasn't about revenge or pride. It was about presence. I had earned the right to be in that room, whether they knew it or not. I pulled out the black dress from my closet. Simple, sharp, the one that said, "I'm not here to impress you. I'm here because I no longer need to." The fabric felt steady against my skin as I zipped it up. The mirror showed a woman they wouldn't recognize. And that, I realized, was the whole point. I stepped out the door and headed toward the Bellwether. Growing up in Savannah, you never forgot where you were supposed to be. Heritage mattered more than heart. Lawn parties were battlegrounds fought in silk and seersucker. My parents, Kenneth and Blythe Maddox, wore their lineage like armor. Our family crest hung in the foyer like a warning. Legacy first, feelings later. Elton played the role perfectly. He was born with the Maddox jawline, the politician's handshake, a resume tailored for Ivy League brochures. Marin, always a step behind him, but just as polished, mastered the performance of charm and thinly veiled cruelty by 13. They moved through the world like they owned it, and in Savannah, that was almost true. I never quite figured out where I fit in. I wasn't rebellious in the screaming, slamming doors kind of way. I just drifted toward the kitchen when no one was looking. Inez ran it like a cathedral, quiet, reverent, everything in its place. She wasn't family by blood, but in that house, she was the only one who ever truly saw me. When I was 10, she let me dice onions beside her. I cried through every cut, but Inez never told me to stop. "You got steady hands, baby," she'd say, "the kind that make people feel safe when you cook." I started sneaking cookbooks under my pillow, watching reruns of old culinary competitions like bedtime stories. My mother found me piping choux pastry at midnight once. She didn't ask how I learned. She just said, "Mitchell's hire chefs, they don't become them." By the time I was 21, I knew I had to go. The weight of their expectations was smothering every part of me that felt alive. I packed a duffel bag, withdrew the last $2,000 from my college account, and left a note on the mahogany desk in my father's study. It said simply, "I love you, but I can't be this version of me anymore." They didn't chase me. Not once. 5 years later, I stood outside the Bellwether with steady hands and a full heart. My name wasn't on the awning, but my fingerprints were on every inch of that place. I stepped inside and let the familiar scent of seared rosemary and brown butter guide me toward the table where the Maddoxes were already seated. The maitre d' greeted me with a subtle nod, a signal of quiet recognition. He said nothing else, just gestured toward the main dining room with the same professional grace he extended to every guest. It was exactly what I needed. Tonight, I wasn't Chef Maddox. I was Elra, the middle child with nothing to prove and no one left to impress. They had, of course, claimed the best table, center of the room, under the hand-blown glass chandelier I'd commissioned from a local artisan. Marin sat with her back straight, her earrings louder than her voice. Elton looked up briefly from his phone, then returned to scrolling. My parents were already mid-conversation, likely about country club renovations or someone's unfortunate second divorce. "Elra," my mother said, rising halfway from her seat with a practiced air kiss. "You made it." "Would have been a shame to miss your first engagement dinner," I replied, taking the only open chair. "Second," Marin chimed in with a too-sweet smile. "But who's counting?" My father poured me a glass of wine without asking. A Cabernet, not what paired with the opening course, but I said nothing. Marine's eyes flicked over my dress. "You look comfortable," she purred. "She's always had a more minimalist style," my mother said, folding her napkin. "Even as a child. You remember that awful corduroy phase?" They laughed politely, as if I weren't sitting right there. Celeste, one of our most experienced servers, approached the table with an amused crouch. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second before she placed the delicate bite in front of each guest: compressed watermelon, fermented black garlic, a single microgreen. Not one of them knew it had taken me 3 months to perfect that bite. "Well, this is precious," my father muttered. "It's called an amuse-bouche," I offered. "I know what it's called," Marin snapped. "I just didn't expect something so conceptual. You know, Elra, you've always had that artsy streak, never quite practical." "And still unmarried," my mother added lightly, as if it were an observation rather than a verdict. Elton stayed quiet, but his fiancée, Cecily, gave me a small smile. Pity or politeness, I couldn't tell. As the next course was cleared, Jose passed behind me with the wine pairings. He didn't say a word, but the way he lifted the bottle, our reserve Chardonnay, was his own quiet salute. I kept my eyes on the table, hands steady on the linen, while they picked apart my life bite by bite without ever tasting the truth. I used to come home so exhausted my arms would shake unlocking the door. Back then, home was a basement room in a crumbling shotgun house I shared with 3 other women and more roaches than people. The walls sweated in summer, froze in winter, and the stove clicked ominously even when it was off. But it had a lock and a window that caught the morning light. I called that luxury. In those first years, I worked anywhere that would take me. A prep cook at a bistro from 5 to noon, a line cook in Midtown from 1 to 10, weekends at a bakery where I burned the same patch of my wrist so many times the skin stopped scarring. I kept notebooks in my apron pocket, filling them with sauce, ratios, spice combinations, things I overheard chefs mutter under their breath but never explained. Chef Yvette Leon changed everything. She hired me as a kitchen assistant at one of her pop-up tastings in New Orleans. I thought she'd forget me. Instead, she sent for me 3 weeks later. "Your knife work is sloppy," she said by way of welcome. "But your instincts, I'd like to see if they can be sharpened." I worked for her for nearly 2 years. She taught me discipline without cruelty, elegance without ego. "We don't chase applause," she'd say. "We create silence." When guests paused between bites, that held breath, that reverence, that was the applause that mattered. It was at one of her charity events that I met James Warren. He tried my spring pea risotto and asked who made it. I thought he was just another guest fishing for compliments. Turned out he was a venture capitalist with a soft spot for food that made him feel something. "You ever think of running your own place?" he asked. "Every day." He smiled. "Then stop. Waiting for permission." 6 months later, the Bellwether opened its doors in Charleston's historic quarter. The space had been a failed jazz bar before I gutted it. I chose the tiles, the linen weight, the curve of every chair, and I kept my name off every article, every profile. Not out of shame, but because I wanted the food to speak first. Now I watched Maureen prod at the next course, hand-rolled pasta with pancetta and mint, and sigh dramatically. "This is it?" she asked, poking it like it had wronged her. My father squinted at the wine list. "Not a vintage I recognize," he murmured, as if disapproval lent him authority. I said nothing. Not yet. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was observation. Let them reveal themselves, I thought, before I show them what I've become. Marin's voice cut back in as she reached for her glass, already bored. "Honestly, Elra, I don't know how you eat at places like this on a cook's salary." The third course had just been cleared when Marin leaned forward, chin resting delicately on the back of her manicured hand, and said it. "Be honest. Elra, can you even afford this place?" It landed softly, like so many of her cuts did, but the sting was immediate. I glanced across the table. My mother pretended to adjust her napkin. My father sipped his wine like it was none of his concern. Elton said nothing. Cecily looked vaguely horrified, which meant she still had some softness left in her. "I manage," I said evenly. Bradley smirked. "So what's the secret? Living off credit cards? Or are you dating someone with deep pockets?" I stared at him, then took a slow sip of water. "I'm not dating anyone." He raised an eyebrow. "Then how exactly do you swing a meal like this? It's not exactly Olive Garden." The air thickened. Even Celeste paused as she passed, catching just enough to stiffen before moving on. I looked to Marcus, standing discreetly near the service station. Our eyes met for the briefest second. "Not yet," I thought. "Let them keep going." "I mean, it's fine," Marin added, lifting her wineglass. "We can split your portion if that makes things easier. It wouldn't be the first time we've had to rescue you." Rescue me? That was rich. From what? A life I actually wanted? Bradley pulled out his wallet as Marcus approached with the black leather folder. "Please," he said with a self-satisfied smile. "Let me get this one. Consider it my gift to the family." My father did the expected performance, hands half raised, a forced, "No, I couldn't possibly," as he leaned back in his chair. Bradley opened the check and paused. I watched the color in his face shift from smug to confused. "Wait, this can't be right," he muttered. "What is it?" Elton asked. "There's only wine on this bill, no food. That's gotta be an error." Marcus stepped forward, calm and precise. "Is there a problem, sir?" "Yes," Bradley said, tapping the paper. "Ooh, you didn't charge us for the meal." Marcus looked to me. I gave a quiet nod. "There's no error," he said, turning back to Bradley. "The food portion was taken care of by Chef Maddox." For a moment, it didn't register. Then my father blinked. "Chef Maddox?" Marcus smiled faintly and turned to me. "Your usual table is prepared for your investor meeting, Chef. Would you like me to escort them when you're ready?" Silence spread over the table like smoke. I set down my glass and looked around at them all, finally meeting their eyes. "Yes," I said calmly. "Please close out the beverage tab. The rest is on the house." No one spoke. Not right away. Marin stared at me as if I'd just switched languages mid-sentence. Elton looked between Marcus and me like he'd missed an important cue. My father sat frozen, wineglass halfway to his mouth. And my mother's hand went instinctively to her necklace, fingers gripping the pearls she wore like a lifeline. "You Own this place? She asked, voice tight. Yes, I said simply. I'm the executive chef and sole proprietor of the Bellwether. But it's been featured in Bon Appetit, my father said slowly, and the Times. I nodded. Last year, 4 stars. You work here? Lilton clarified, as if that somehow softened the blow. I built it. They didn't know what to do with that. My mother blinked fast, pulling her expression into something that vaguely resembled pride. Well, she said, if you'd told us earlier, we could have celebrated this. We always believed you had potential. I smiled without warmth. No. You believed in control. You believed in image. You believed in what made sense to you. But you didn't believe in me. Not when I needed it. Cecily had the grace to lower her eyes. Elton shifted uncomfortably. I left because I couldn't. Keep shrinking into a version of myself that fit your world, I continued. And I stayed quiet because I needed to see what kind of people you really were when I wasn't performing for you. Marin scoffed. So this was some kind of test? A trap to humiliate us? No, I said. It was a mirror. Her face flushed. That's manipulative. I looked at her, not with anger, but with something closer to pity. I needed to know how you'd treat me if you thought I had nothing, and now I do. A memory flashed. Chef Yvette pressing a sticky note into my palm with the name of her butcher. The good ones don't just teach you how to cut, they teach you when to walk away. Another, James Warren shaking my hand outside a converted Jazz. His voice low. Make it yours. Every inch. And the first article, a photo of my hand holding a plated fig tart. No face, just the caption. A new voice in Southern cuisine doesn't speak. She listens with flavor. There were dozens more. My first mentorship program for young chefs. The cookbook I was nearly done writing. The early sketches of a second location I hadn't told anyone about yet. All of it mine. But why keep it from us? My mother asked again, her voice slipping into that soft, sweet Southern tone she used in interviews and family crises. We are your family. I exhaled. You're right, you are. And if you'd shown me an ounce of respect when you thought I was struggling, this night would have looked very different. Marcus returned quietly, setting a small note in front of me, a reminder that the investors had arrived early. I folded it once, then stood from my chair. Excuse me, I have a business to run. They didn't leave all at once. The table lingered in awkward silence until someone, my mother I think, reached for her clutch and said too brightly, Well, this has been quite a surprise. Lilton stood and cleared his throat. Elijah, he said quietly, for what it's worth, this place, it's incredible. I'm sorry I didn't say that sooner. His voice didn't waver, and for the first time all night, he looked at me without calculation. Thank you, I said. And I meant it. My mother stepped forward next, her tone shifting, into performance again. We should do brunch, something casual, just the family, catch up properly, now that everything's out in the open. I raised an eyebrow. Brunch at the club, maybe? She offered. Or wherever you prefer, of course. Cecily gave me a soft smile. I'd like that, honestly. Then Bradley cleared his throat, clearly eager to reclaim some kind of authority. Look, I may have come off a little strong earlier, he began, but this place, what you've built, it's the real deal. And if you ever consider expansion, I know people. We could talk capital, franchising models. This restaurant, I interrupted, is not your social ladder. He blinked. My mother pressed her lips together. No one argued. I let the silence stretch just long enough to sink in before adding, but I'd be happy to host the rehearsal dinner. As my gift. Marin, who had said nothing since the reveal, looked up with surprise. You do that. You're still my sister, I said. And this place means something to me. If I offer it, it's on my terms. Not because I'm trying to win anyone. Over. She gave a small nod. Thank you. The staff had already begun to reset the dining room as they filed out, their goodnights polite but hurried. As the door closed behind the last of them, I slipped into the back office and pulled out my journal, the one I'd been using for my cookbook draft. Food has always been the only language I trusted, I wrote. Not for approval, but for clarity. For truth. For home. When home wasn't safe. The pen moved more easily now. The words didn't ache like they used to. They tasted clean. They felt mine. I closed the notebook just as Miranda knocked gently on the door. 2 weeks later, I met them for brunch. Not at the club, not at some polished bistro with white tablecloths and bottomless mimosas, but at Elma's, a chef-owned spot tucked between a laundromat and a tattoo parlor where the coffee was strong and the biscuits could make you cry. We sat on mismatched chairs around a table that wobbled slightly, sunlight slanting through chipped blinds. My mother wrinkled her nose at first, but then she took a bite of the sweet potato hash and didn't say another word. Elton asked about my cookbook. Cecily asked to pre-order. Marin, surprisingly, just listened. It wasn't perfect, but it was. Quieter. Easier. They weren't trying to fix me and I wasn't performing. For the first time in years, it felt less like a test. That afternoon, I returned to the Bellwether and met with the mentorship group. 8 young chefs in training, wide-eyed and stubborn, reminding me of myself before the bruises and burns. We filleted fish, tasted sauces, discussed salt the way others discussed poetry. Zoe, one of the youngest, nailed the hollandaise on her first try. When I told her that, her face lit up like someone had handed her the keys to her future. Maybe, in a way, I had. Later that night, I found a text from Marin. Need advice. No BS. What would you do if the caterer for your bridal shower backed out the night before? I smiled and typed back, call your sister. She knows someone. Then I opened my notebook to the final page of the manuscript. The last line had been eluding me for weeks, but now it came without force. These aren't just recipes, they are proof. You can feed yourself with dignity when the world starves you of it. I closed the journal, walked through the restaurant, one last time and turned off the lights. The room settled into stillness behind me, full of everything I'd built on my own terms, in my own time. And for the first time in a long while, I walked home with nothing left to prove.